If it's Tuesday, the migrant surge at the southern border hits record levels yet again as Texas's governor approves a sweeping and untested expansion of powers for local law enforcement. And Senate negotiators are still without a framework for a deal on immigration. Plus, wartime pressure, a new group of House Democrats pushing the president to do anything he can to get Israel to shift its military strategy in Gaza immediately, while Ukraine's president says he's confident U.S. funding will come through despite the stalemated Congress. And new lows for President Biden as his approval ratings decline yet again, along with new lows for his likely 2024 opponent as the former president embraces authoritarian rhetoric and threats of political retribution. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in Washington, where you can sum up the situation on Capitol Hill and the situation on the southern border with the same single word: broken. Starting here in Washington, Senate negotiators were back at it today, and they made some progress, according to Senate leadership. But an actual deal and legislative text that could get 60 votes in the Senate and pass the House, that's still a long way off. Which means that funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for other U.S. national security priorities is stuck in limbo, too, because it's all been linked together. Today, lawmakers told NBC News that they will not rush to a deal, despite dire warnings from Democrats on the issue of Ukraine and dire warnings from Republicans on the crisis at the border. You're looking at new footage of the scene at the border in Eagle Pass, Texas earlier today, as DHS officials tell NBC News that border apprehensions hit a new record yesterday, with more than 12,000 migrants taken into custody on the southern border in one day. Also yesterday, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a sweeping series of bills authorizing Texas law enforcement to arrest migrants who cross illegally. In a press conference in the border town of Brownsville yesterday, Governor Abbott framed the move as necessary protection from potential threats coming across the border.
The United Nations declared that the border between the United States and Mexico is the deadliest land crossing in the entire world. Biden's deliberate inaction has left Texas to fend for itself.
The new law could lead to mass arrests and numerous court challenges. Already, the ACLU has filed suit, and the White House is condemning the new laws and questioning Abbott's authority to enact them, saying this is an extreme law that will make communities in Texas less safe. The federal government, not individual states, is charged with determining how and when to remove non-citizens for violating immigration laws. This move comes after a federal judge ordered Texas to take down a razor wire barrier that the governor put up in the Rio Grande earlier this month. Governor Abbott's actions at the border stand in stark contrast to the gridlock and inaction in Washington on this issue. And it's not just the border. This Congress hasn't addressed much of anything in the past 11 months. According to a new study featured by Axios, 2023 was the least productive year Congress has had in decades. Just 20 bills were able to make it through Congress and onto the president's desk this year. The previous Congress, in contrast, was able to pass over 360 bills during its two-year tenure. I'm joined now by three of my NBC News colleagues. Senior national politics reporter Sahil Kapoor has the latest on the border negotiations as they continue on the Hill. Gabe Gutierrez is at the White House, and Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley is here with me on set in Washington. So, Sahil, what is the latest on the status of these negotiations? How close are we to the Senate calling it for the year and picking this up again in January?
We are right on the cusp, Garrett, of the Senate calling it for the year, deciding to go home for the holidays and picking things back up next year. The negotiators continue to talk about progress, behind closed doors as they try to hash this out. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer all but conceded less than 2 hours ago that they're not going to get this done this year. He said he's optimistic that we can get things done when we get back, which is a clear indication that they're not going to get it done in the final final days of this year. Nevertheless, there does appear to be a real desire within both parties to find a deal here. Schumer professed as much. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell did. Chris Murphy, the lead Democratic negotiator, said the fate of the world is what's at stake, and he'll continue to negotiate, even if it means limiting his Christmas holiday to a single day or so. Nevertheless, it looks like the clock is going to run out on this year, leaving it to be, as you point out, one of the most staggeringly unproductive years for Congress in a long time.
The fate of the world, no pressure. As we look to January, though, Sahil, I mean, look, you and I both know Congress does pretty well with hard deadlines. They struggle with soft deadlines. I feel like January, this doesn't get any easier. There's government funding. There's a presidential race. Donald Trump's going to be out on the stump every single day, probably not singing the praises of whatever this group comes up with. How does the calendar turning to 2024 make this harder to pass than easier?
Well, it certainly creates a lot more landmines. I mean, the politics of the presidential primary are going to matter. Every word Donald Trump, the likely Republican nominee, says is going to weigh a ton. You know, it would not be the first time if he attempts it here to try to blow up negotiations with a tweet or whatever we're calling it these days. Then there's the calendar in January. Legislatively, there's a January 19th and a February 2nd two-part deadline to fund the government. That is going to be the single biggest topic at hand, the single biggest priority at hand for Congress when they get back. And we're looking at a big confrontation brewing after two punts and the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, saying he's not interested in yet another punt. So between the politics of an election year and the legislative calendar, it's certainly going to make prospects for a border deal harder. Still, I will emphasize again that there's a real desire to get it done, at least in the Senate. The House could be a whole other situation if they do reach a deal. Yeah,
I mean, let's expand on that a little bit, Sahil, because the Senate wanting to get a deal is not the same thing from the House even taking that deal up. What are we hearing from the other chamber about the likelihood that anything the Senate agrees on would be palatable to them?
Well, a few things. Speaker Johnson has said what he wants is H.R. 2, that far-reaching, conservative, restrictive border bill that is dead on arrival in the Senate. We know that's not going anywhere. It's not going to get any Democratic votes. But there's some speculation as to whether that's simply a negotiating position, whether he's waiting for the Senate to come up with a product, and then he'd be willing to negotiate. Some people around him, some people around Johnson who have spoken to, do think it's a negotiating position, but we're not going to see movement on that until the Senate passes it. Still, I mean, it creates a complicated scenario because these senators, Garrett, as you and I well know, we've covered them, they're used to the House simply taking what they come up with. These are delicate negotiations. Nancy Pelosi's House was very willing to accept compromises that the Senate came up with. This House, Speaker Johnson's House, is not willing to do quite the same thing. And Johnson is, of course, under pressure from his hardliners, like the Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, who is insisting that if the Senate passes anything short of H.R. 2, that the House should simply kill it. Republicans do like this issue politically. They think they can campaign on it.
All right, Sahil Kapoor holding down the fort for us on Capitol Hill. Sahil, thanks. Gabe, the White House has been pretty quiet about these negotiations. The DHS secretary has been in the room for a lot of them, but we're not hearing much. Is this a situation where the White House doesn't want to touch this unless they feel like the president can close the deal?
Well, Garrett, that was the case several days ago, and the White House press secretary was asked just a short time ago whether the White House should have gotten involved sooner. They have gotten involved in just the last couple of days. The White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients, has been involved in this, and as you mentioned, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has been in the room for many of these negotiations, but we understand that's mostly in an advisory role to discuss how these, any potential policy changes would impact the DHS. But Garrett, this issue of immigration has been something that has stymied not just the Biden administration, but others before it, but specifically the Biden administration, which has argued that, they put forth a legislative fix to this, but Congress has failed to act. But within the past several days, they have gotten more involved. And politically, there are some, perhaps in the Biden campaign that say, look, if we work on this now, if we make some changes now, we could take this issue off 2024 at least somewhat. Although, as you mentioned, Garrett, former President Trump not likely to like any sort of deal, no matter what it entails.
Well, I could see the political argument for Biden here, where it's almost like he can argue that he gets forced into taking a deal by Republicans and then benefit from it on the back end if it actually works. But you brought President Trump into this, former President Trump into this, and I think that's the other part of it, too. The White House has been very strong in condemning the former president's comments on migrants over the weekend. How do you see that affecting the Biden campaign's messaging? I mean, if they're trying to do border policies that progressives say are Trumpian while they're banging on Donald Trump. I mean, this is just a very, very small needle to thread here for the White House.
Yeah, that's right. And the Biden campaign is getting it really from all sides. I've spoken to immigration advocates at the border who say that they feel betrayed by the Biden administration for even considering some of these policies. But Garrett, you mentioned the Trump comments over the weekend, poisoning the blood of the United States and referring to undocumented immigrants. The White House and the Biden campaign came out with a very strong statement condemning that, comparing it to the writings of Adolf Hitler. But Garrett, any statement, and you had it in your introduction, referring to the changes down in Texas, the White House has repeatedly referred to many of the Republican policy positions as extremist, and look for that as something they've been hammering over and over again, and that they will continue to hammer into 2024, labeling whatever the Republicans are supporting here as extremist. The question is, how far is the Biden administration willing to go in these negotiations to get this supplemental bill through?
It's going to be very interesting to see where these negotiations land. Gabe Gutierrez for us at the White House. Gabe, thank you. Julia, I turn to you now. The folks down in Texas are coming up with new and interesting ways to keep us very busy, keep you very busy here. What do you make of this new Texas law? Is this designed to be effective, or is this designed to create court challenges? What do you see going on here?
It's certainly one of the most radical changes in immigration policy I've ever seen. I mean, to talk about national sovereignty issues is just the beginning. Imagine if you're an immigrant and it depends on where you enter the country in determining whether or not you can stay here, whether you come through California or Texas. It's up to that state rather than the United States of America to decide whether or not you get those protections. That's a radical departure, because this would allow state and local police to arrest anyone they suspect of crossing the border illegally. And groups like the ACLU think it's going to lead to a lot of profiling, a lot of civil liberties being trampled over. The other thing that I think isn't getting talked about a lot is that these immigrants would go before Texas state judges. Right now, we have a totally different system where immigrants go before judges that have been appointed by the Justice Department to handle just immigration. It's a complicated law. So for state judges to decide whether or not someone has the right to stay in the United States is a total departure of how we've done things in the past, and it will definitely, it's already being challenged by groups, and I think we can expect a challenge from the Biden administration as well.
So is Texas doing this? Do they have the capacity to actually follow through on this? Or do you think, is the whole goal here to get something like this in front of the Supreme Court and try to change the existing precedent here to give states more authority and kind of blow up the whole immigration system as it exists right now?
Well, we've certainly seen Texas time and time again test the waters. I know this is a more conservative court. They know they have the numbers on their side. You mentioned those record numbers we just saw yesterday. And they time and time again have said it's because of the inability of the Biden administration. But look, some local sheriffs in Texas are already sounding off saying they don't have the ability to practically carry this through. Their jails will be full. People who they need to respond to crime and first responders, they will now be tied up dealing with this vast immigration crisis that should be falling on federal agents. So yes, we've seen Abbott do things like razor wire, border buoys, busing migrants to cities and blue cities inside the U.S. This goes way further than that. But I think it's important to realize that Abbott could have some political ambitions here, too.
Sure.
We saw President of Mexico today, Lopez Obrador, say he thinks this is because Abbott wants to be a vice presidential candidate.
Yeah.
But it's also, you have to remember that people who are designing these policies in Texas, in fact, the border czar of Texas, came from the Trump administration. And they're designing this so that if a future Trump administration takes over, they'll have everything set up to really enact some of these things that seem totally a departure from the norm now, could become more normalized.
Speaking of a departure from the norm, I want to talk about these border numbers, these record-breaking numbers, 12,000 people apprehended, I guess, just yesterday. How much of a departure is that, and what does that tell us about, I mean, the idea that there's a crisis at the border has become such politicized language, but 12,000 people just showing up, do we have places to put those people? I mean, put those numbers into perspective for us.
So a great perspective is that Jay Johnson, who was Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, says that it was a 5-alarm fire when the numbers got above 1,000 a day.
Oh.
So now we're talking over 12,000 a day. Those numbers have crept up, but this is a new record we're hitting yet again. And over 11,000 of those came in illegally, which means that even though the Biden administration has tried to create more legal pathways. The vast majority are still coming in illegally, and they're filling up capacity. They know there are 26,000 migrants in Border Patrol custody right now. That's more than they can handle. And, you know, a lot of them are coming through these remote areas like Eagle Pass, Texas, or where I was last week, Lukeville, Arizona, where sometimes there's one border agent handling hundreds of migrants coming through at a time. And cartels do that on purpose because they want to surge people in places to overwhelm CBP.
And we'll have to save this for our 2-hour show, but that's changed the politics a little bit, too, where you've got governors like Katie Hobbs, a Democrat in Arizona, who are starting to sound a lot like Republicans when they're talking about this crisis. Julia Ainsley, we have to leave it there. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us on this. And still ahead, a first-hand account from the front lines of the Israel-Hamas war. Hallie Jackson joins us live in Tel Aviv after interviewing an American-Israeli IDF soldier wounded in Gaza. Plus, the potential consequences if the U.S. does not send aid to Ukraine, as President Zelensky looks to enlist hundreds of thousands of additional Ukrainian soldiers to fight against Russia. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war, where the humanitarian situation in Gaza grows somehow still more dire by the day. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health estimates nearly 20,000 people in Gaza have been killed since the start of the war. Those numbers are unconfirmable. The UN now says more than 60% of Gaza's infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged, and 90% of the population has been displaced. It comes as the head of the International Red Cross described the war as a, quote, moral failure, urging Israel and Hamas to once again reach a deal to pause the fighting. Those warnings come as the UN Security Council again postponed a vote amid intense negotiations on a resolution calling for a halt to hostilities in Gaza to allow critically needed humanitarian aid in. That draft resolution originally called for the cessation of hostilities, but was watered down to suspension of hostilities in the hope of getting a yes vote by the U.S., which had vetoed previous UN resolutions. Now, even though the resolution itself was mostly symbolic, if it passes with U.S. support, well, that would mark a significant shift by the administration and send a pretty clear signal to Israel about the growing concerns over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Joining me now is Hallie Jackson in Tel Aviv. So, Hallie, what are you hearing on the ground about this humanitarian situation in Gaza? It's hard for me to continue to describe in more specific ways how bad it's getting just from what we can see on the outside.
Yeah, hard for you, hard for international aid organizations who are struggling in some ways to describe the horrors of what they continue to see on the ground, with the language of it being a moral failure, according to one, and the idea being the International or the Red Cross, the idea being it is difficult to even see what's happening there because it is very difficult for outside people to get in, right? For international journalists, for example, to get across the border into Gaza. NBC News has a team there. That's how we are seeing some of these images and telling some of these stories. But as we get closer and closer to that grim milestone, 20,000 people killed, it is, again, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, as you note, unconfirmable, but it is why you are seeing this pressure now from international groups, from international, from countries around the world, putting pressure on Israel to try to figure out a way to get to a ceasefire. That UN vote that we were expecting today, Security Council vote, has been postponed now yet again. Garrett, there's no reason to think that the outcome is going to change. We've seen this movie before. The United States has a veto. It likely will use that. The position hasn't shifted, but that's kind of the global landscape here as it relates to what's happening in Gaza.
But the position is shifting at least a little bit in public, right? I mean, we know the Biden administration has asked the Israeli government to move to what they're calling the next phase in the war. Is there any sign that that's happening?
Sure, but that's different than saying that Israel should have a wholesale ceasefire at all, right? I mean, this idea of behind-the-scenes pressure to move towards this more targeted phase is one that has been well reported over the course of the last week. We have seen that more publicly with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in the region, basically saying that out loud. What he didn't say was any kind of a timeline. And publicly, Biden administration officials have been very careful not to put like a date on when they'd like to see Israel make this move. They've been extremely cautious across the board to say it's going to be Israel's decision. We heard that from Jake Sullivan. We heard that from Lloyd Austin. And that's the perspective on the transition into a more targeted phase, partly because of what we're seeing, the humanitarian crisis. But there's also this question now, right, around the return of hostages and how you can get that to happen, Garrett. And we're seeing a little bit of movement on that. The National Security Council spokesperson says that nothing appears imminent at this point. But We do see, for example, the Israeli president calling for a potential, saying that Israel's ready for a pause. So that's sort of the landscape there, Garrett.
All right, Hallie Jackson, thank you for that reporting. And joining me now is Democratic Congressman from Colorado, Jason Crow. Congressman, yesterday was he and 5 other Democratic lawmakers who served in the military or the CIA sent a letter to President Biden urging him to put pressure on Israel to change course in Gaza. Congressman, I read this letter, and these are sort of like all the national security grown-ups among Democrats in the U.S. House here, a pretty serious group of people. What do you want to see the president do differently here?
Well, hi, Garrett. I join with my colleagues, as you say, all of whom have either military experience or worked for the Department of Defense or the CIA. Most of us spent years of our lives fighting the U.S. global war on terrorism. And one of the most important lessons we learned during that period is that military power has limitations. You can't bomb away a terror ideology. And we want to take that lesson and we want to impart that lesson on our key partner, Israel here, who we are afraid is moving in the very wrong direction. So one of the key warnings was we have to have a significant and immediate shift in this, because the more civilian casualties we mount, not only is that a moral problem for America and for Israel, but certainly it could be a strategic one as well, as we are creating potentially more extremism than we're trying to resolve.
I mean, I know there's not some bright, clear line here, but if 20,000 civilians are really dead inside Gaza, is that moment already passed? You can win a war tactically and lose strategically if everybody who's left hates your guts even more than they did before the war started.
I certainly wanted to see a different approach to this since day one, and I was very vocal early on in this operation about doing this the right way. Right? So Israel has the right to defend itself. It has an obligation to defend itself. And I've been very clear all along that Hamas must be dismantled. Hamas cannot be allowed to exist. It must be destroyed. And there is a military component to that, because innocent Palestinians are also victims of Hamas. But it's not enough to say we want to destroy terror. The goal is one piece, but doing that the right way is just as important as setting the goal itself. In the right way must be a more strategic, surgical and focused counter-terror operation instead of the broad-based bombing campaign that we have seen, because a broad-based bombing campaign, like I said, runs the substantial risk of fueling the very extremism that Hamas actually feeds on. It feeds on hopelessness and despair and anguish. And every time you kill civilians in conflict, you just fuel more of that hopelessness and despair.
Yeah, I just wonder if 20,000 people are already dead, it might be kind of too late to shift course on that point. I want to ask you about another element of this letter, though. You talk about the idea that the U.S. is a source of credibility and power. Do you worry that President Biden's embrace of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the tactics Israel has used here could come at a cost to America's standing in the world? Do we bear any responsibility for those 20,000 deaths?
Well, certainly the president and the Secretary of Defense and the vice president and Jake Sullivan and many other senior administration officials have been very clear that we are calling for a shift and that we are very concerned with Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy here, which we do not think serves Israel and the people of Israel, nor does it serve American interests. So we continue to push on that, and I will continue to do so from my perch in Congress as well.
You're calling, you're pushing, but would you go so far as to condition additional military aid on Israel changing course or changing tactics? I mean, would you put any kind of conditions in an aid bill like what Bernie Sanders, for example, has proposed?
Well, what we want to do is put guardrails in place to ensure that this aid is being used consistent with U.S. interests. Because as you just noted, the United States has a lot of other things to look at. Right? We are completely committed to Israel's peace and security, into the state of Israel, but we also are fighting a war throughout many places for people's hearts and minds. Right? We are supporting our partners in Ukraine. We are looking at an increasingly aggressive and assertive China. And a big part of that great power competition that we're playing throughout the world is making sure that we are making the case for democracy, making sure that we fight consistent with our values. So certainly public sentiment and public will is an important piece to that. And I am concerned that the manner in which this war is being prosecuted in Gaza undermines our ability to make that case, both within the United States and abroad.
A senator's conditions may be a congressman's guardrails here. I see some equivalence there. I want to ask you, if this war can't be solved militarily ultimately, right? There's got to be somebody running Gaza when this war is over. What does a diplomatic solution look like in your view? The president's called for a revitalized Palestinian Authority. Prime Minister Netanyahu has totally rejected that idea. How do you see this potentially ending?
Well, first of all, the Palestinian people also have a right to exist, and there should be a Palestinian state. There should be a state of Israel that's safe and secure that we commit to, but also a Palestinian state. A two-state solution, in my view, remains the only path forward. But that's why we wrote this letter, because as you noted earlier in your program, if 60% of the infrastructure in the buildings in Gaza are already destroyed as a result of this operation, and that continues in upwards of 20,000 civilian casualties, at some point we reach a moment where a two-state solution in a viable government becomes out of reach.
Right.
So it's important why we have an immediate and drastic shift in that operation, so we actually can get to a point in the months and years ahead of rebuilding a Palestinian Authority, of actually having a viable partner in the Palestinian government and leadership that we can count on and work with.
And Congressman, finally, since October 7th, we've seen U.S. troops, American facilities in places like Iraq and Syria targeted now more than 100 times. Do you think the administration is doing enough to protect our troops and deter those kinds of actions in the Middle East?
Well, I'm doing my oversight job as a member of the Intelligence Committee and the National Security Committees in Congress to make sure that we are. I never take that for granted. I've been asking a lot of questions. We do a lot of oversight hearing. We have surged resources into the area, Navy resources, additional air defense capability. You're right. There have been upwards of 100 attacks on U.S. facilities, our U.S. service members and installations in the region since October 7th. So the fact that we have a footprint in the region, and that footprint has been threatened by the increased risk in the last 2.5 months. So I'm going to continue to push hard. But right now, the administration has protected our troops, has protected commercial shipping, and has done what's necessary. But we will continue to make sure that they do so.
All right. Congressman Jason Crow, we got to leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And up next, 4 weeks until the Iowa caucuses, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are duking it out on the trail. Plus, remembering a trailblazer. Funeral tributes today for Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The calendar on my phone still says 2023, but I know it's not for long. With the first presidential primary contest now less than 4 weeks away, a new New York Times Siena poll out today has Donald Trump leading former President Biden by 2 points among registered voters in a hypothetical 2024 rematch. But flip it to likely voters, and the poll flips too. President Biden leading the former president by 2 points there. Now, look, there are months for each campaign to turn registered voters into likely voters, and more twists and turns to come in this race than we could probably imagine. But heading into election year, all signs point to a very competitive and contentious 2024 environment. Joining me now on set is Daniella Diaz, congressional reporter for Politico, Chuck Rocha, co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and founder of Nuestro PAC, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. So, Daniella, you've heard this one before. 2024 is going to turn on which party can turn out their voters. Who would you rather be if you look at those data points right now between the president and the former president locked in this messy rematch?
Honestly, neither. It looks really, you guys are the experts. It looks really, really tough. This is one election that I'm actually very excited to not be covering, considered I did cover 2020 as a campaign embed, and that one was pretty interesting in Iowa, seeing who could be the front runner there. As we remember, Biden wasn't the front runner in Iowa at all. That turned out to be a mess. We'll see how this goes in just a couple of weeks. But they both are facing really tough odds right now, and that's what I find interesting is that Nikki Haley is still in the race. And even though she's not beating Trump right now in primary polls, she could be Biden in a general. But when in Iowa, it doesn't seem like it. Maybe she has a stronger chance in New Hampshire. That's after Iowa. But it's tough. I think it's going to be tough to see how these two get voters to turn out for them.
To get people excited. Matt, one of the things that struck me in this poll was that President Trump, former President Trump, has the lead with younger voters. That's certainly not what happened in 2020. Did the youth suddenly change their mind?
Is he hip now all of a sudden?
Is he been memeified? Is this about a backlash to the president's handling of the situation in Gaza? What do you attribute that to?
I think the latter. I mean, what I also found, though, the Siena poll, when they wrote it up, had, some typical profile of a 27-year-old in the Bay Area who was disillusioned with Biden, but was really fearful of Trump. I just have a hard time believing that a 27-year-old in the Bay Area, when faced with Biden and Trump, is going to suddenly be like, I'm not going to show up. But I think for right now, that might be where some of those stuff in the polls show. But to be fair, Trump does clean up with younger voters, according to all the polls I've seen, internal and external, among the GOP base. So that could give a little guidance there, at least.
And may affect the Haley part of that conversation. Chuck, I want to put something up on that one of these younger voters told our NBC team. If we could show this on the screen. This voter says, Biden made a lot of really big promises in his campaign, and virtually none of them were followed through on, said Austin Capp, a 25-year-old living in Castle Rock, Colorado. He could have codified Roe v. Wade. He could have stood up for the rights of people all over this country. He could have done a lot of things, but he didn't. What do you make of that critique of President Biden at the 3-year mark here?
I think this is going to be the first election, and I've been doing this for 34 years, where we're going to call it the TikTok election, because this is where these kids are going to get their information. I ran Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. I know a little bit about the youth vote. And what I know is that half of it is just showing up. I think Matt would agree with me. No matter which side of the aisle you're on, these kids just got out of college. They may be going to their first jobs. They want to know who's going to address what they care about. They may not have all the information, but there's one thing I know for sure. They're not tuning into the nightly news like I do at 5 o'clock to see what the weather and the traffic's going to be like. They're on TikTok or some other social media getting information, and Donald Trump is kicking our butt on TikTok.
In terms of the tactical approach, not the message.
Just having a massive amount of memes and people out there talking about him.
Matt,
I've actually heard this, right? So everyone, it's kind of thought to be common knowledge that the left and Democrats kind of dominate TikTok. I've heard actually it's far more conservative than you think. And I think as a party, from an official apparatus standpoint, look, I think we need to ban it. I think most of the party establishment believes so. But we're going to get to a point where we either need to ban it once and for all, or somehow get on it, because it's not going away. It's a main source of news for these folks.
I wanted to change the topic here, but you're probably the only person at this table who's on TikTok. What do you make of this argument? Is the left getting its clock cleaned in the meme wars here, or what?
The Biden campaign isn't even on TikTok. I know it's something that they've been toying with. I know they have surrogates on the app, but it is where young people get their news. Whether the news is correct or not, that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. But they're not, on X, which is, a dying platform. They're not on Facebook like their parents. They are getting their news there. And the reality is that's what this, they said that Obama's first campaign was the Twitter campaign, Facebook campaign later. And now we're seeing that TikTok has a total hold over these young voters.
Fine. I'll download TikTok after the show.
You're going to have to as a dad.
I know that's true.
That's where the youths are. That's where the youths are.
So is this where Democrats need the abortion issue to ride to the rescue here? Is this the thing that kind of unites the base, brings people back into the fold? It's certainly the only issue where you see a consistent polling lead for the current president on the former president.
It for sure bailed us out in the midterm elections. And then you couple that with what you have every day of Donald Trump saying on the stump, whether it's talking about blood or talking about whatever the thing of the day is that he's dominating the news cycle on. The thing I find the most interesting is you see Republican Congress and Senate campaigns trying to distance themselves almost as much as you see Democratic House and Senate campaigns trying to distance themselves. I think that's the most interesting thing on the right and on the left of how the top of the ticket is going to affect the bottom of the ticket.
That's very interesting stuff. Matt, I want to talk a little bit about the Republican primary. As Daniela pointed out, is in fact still going on. Nikki Haley has all of a sudden kind of been the candidate with the momentum. She's been taking shots at Trump. I want to play a little bit of what she had to say about the former president yesterday. Let's watch.
I think that his policies were good. But if you look at what's happening now, the part that bothers me is our national security is at risk. And what's he doing? He's praising dictators. When Israel fell to her knees, what'd he do? He talked about an old vendetta with Netanyahu and praised Hezbollah. He praised President Xi a dozen times after China gave the world COVID. He said Kim Jong-un is his friend. He congratulated the Chinese Communist Party on the 70th anniversary. We can't have that.
I think there are a whole lot of people watching that and wondering where that's been for the last several months. But is that going to cut it? Is that direct enough? What do you make of the strategy now of coming more directly, at least, after Donald Trump?
I think it's certainly direct enough. And I think what it also does is now I think she feels strong enough where she can go head-to-head with him. But also she's essentially taking the air out for Ron DeSantis. There's no room in a Haley versus Trump battle. We didn't mention the words Ron DeSantis. And that's hard for him, right? Because he is in a third place or so in New Hampshire at least. He needs some oxygen. So if it becomes a Haley versus Trump fight, that hurts him, number one. But number two is, will we get to see it on a debate stage? That's a real question. Right now, there's no incentive for Trump to come to a debate stage with the polls being the way they are.
He's made very clear he has no interest in this. But all of a sudden, his PAC at least is paying attention to Nikki Haley. Watch this.
Nikki Haley promised.
I will not now, not ever, support raising the gas tax.
Really? Not now? Not ever? Just 24 months later, high tax Haley flipped.
Let's increase the gas tax by 10 cents.
Backing higher taxes hurts families. New Hampshire can't afford Nikki high tax Haley.
Now, this is from the PAC, not the campaign, but I'm from the school of thought that if you want to know what if a campaign really thinks, you see where they spend their money. And here you've got the PAC spending actual dollars to go after Nikki Haley, not Ron DeSantis. What do you make of that in New Hampshire?
They're threatened. They know that she has a shot, and they wouldn't be doing this. They wouldn't be spending their money if they didn't think that they had a credible threat for their primary campaign, and putting money toward that is trying to kill that threat. Now, whether that will be successful or not remains to be seen. It's a couple of weeks until the New Hampshire primary, but it's a sign.
Chuck, what do you make of the kind of asymmetrical warfare element of this, right? That's a very standard issue ad. Nikki Haley's going to raise your taxes. Haley can't go out. Haley's going after Trump on loving Kim Jong-un, and Trump saying she'll raise your taxes. It's a total imbalance in this campaign about the standards by which these candidates are held, is it not?
And I think that's the dilemma that the party's in. That's the dilemma that Nikki Haley's in, is she's never going to be the standard bearer like Donald Trump is, but Donald Trump's got to come back at her with something. Like, I'm sure they had this in the can. It was quick. It was dirty. Boom. He saw the Coke money move over to her, and he gets nervous and put something up. They can make something better later and have some cheeky meme.
I think I only have time for one more question, Chuck, so I'm going to give you a double dip here at the end of this. We have this new CNBC survey out that has Biden trailing Trump by 5 points among Latino voters after winning them by 33 points in 2020. I assume we won't go back to TikTok on this, but maybe we will. What do you make of that challenging turn of course here for the current president with Latino voters?
It's the newest and the best persuasion audience there ever has been, because the average age, we're going to go back to TikTok, of a Latino voter is 27. And so guess what? They're not their mothers and fathers, and they're coming of age quicker, so they're having a bigger impact, and they're not dyed-in-the-wool Democrats or Republicans. They are literally up for grab, and that's why you're seeing them move all over the place.
Did you find any of this when you guys were still in the race? Latino voters paying more attention to Republican candidates? Do you think this is a Trump-specific phenomenon, or is there really a more receptive audience here, Matt?
I think the receptive audience, they're with us in large part, I should say, in more so on social issues than, say, a lot of other parts of the Democratic electorate. They're younger also, absolutely. And yeah, I think they're absolutely up for grabs. Yeah.
It's funny because that same group voted for Bernie Sanders at 73%. That's something to take home.
Especially except for the border.
I want to get Daniela here on this really quick. Have you thoughts on this? On the Latino voters polling so strongly for the former president?
I mean, I've seen a total shift, and I'm a Latina in my own community. I'm from McAllen, Texas, and it's been so different in those 3 counties down there.
Yeah.
Reflective of the congressional races, a seat flipped. And 2 of those members are up for a re-election. Those are tough re-elections for them. It's just a sign of the hold that Donald Trump's message is having on Latino voters. A lot of people say Latino men predominantly support him.
That's certainly who they're targeting.
Yes, and it's working. And
that's who's moving.
And a lot of the voters that I've spoken to feel like they are not being spoken to, or at least helped by the Biden administration.
All right, folks, we got to stop it there. I'll bring you all back to that 2-hour show I keep plugging. Meanwhile, we're going to all go download TikTok. Gentlemen, thank you all. Daniela, thank you. And we want to take a moment now to honor the memory of Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Earlier today at Washington National Cathedral, where friends, family, and government officials honored the life and legacy of a pioneering legal figure in America, the first woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court. In attendance at Justice O'Connor's funeral service, all 9 current justices, 1 retired justice, Biden administration officials, and, of course, the president himself, who delivered one of the eulogies.
Sandra Day O'Connor, the daughter of the American West, was a pioneer in her own right. She 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 was a pioneer in her own right breaking down the barriers in legal and political worlds and the nation's consciousness. To her, the Supreme Court was bedrock, the bedrock of America.
Chief Justice John Roberts also delivered remarks paying tribute to Justice O'Connor's tenacity in the face of the barriers she overcame and her unique style as a justice. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor died on December 1st. She was 93 years old. Welcome back. Despite the impasse on Capitol Hill, Ukrainian President Zelensky said today that he's confident U.S. funding will come through at a critical moment in the war. Zelensky expressed that optimism at his year-end news conference in Kyiv, where he also revealed that his military needs an additional 450 to 500,000 soldiers. And that's about 1% of Ukraine's entire population. To put it into perspective, that would be like 3 million Americans signing up to join the U.S. military. Meanwhile, today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer implored lawmakers once again to approve additional aid for Ukraine.
But no matter how long it takes, we must succeed, because the stakes are high for America and for our friends in Europe, the Middle East, and around the world. We must send more aid to Ukraine to defeat Vladimir Putin.
And I'm joined now by Karen Donfried, former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. She's now a senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center. Ms. Donfried, how big of a red flag is it for Zelensky to be asking for this many new recruits? I cannot imagine there are 450,000 fighting-age Ukrainian men and women just sitting around on their couches right now.
So as we know, fighting-age men have not been allowed to leave Ukraine since the beginning of the war. But 500,000 is a very big number for a country the size of Ukraine. And this has been one of the challenges. Russia is 3 times larger than Ukraine. But what Zelensky's military and what Zelensky himself is signaling is this is going to be a long war.
Is that sort of the unspoken element of this, that it's just going to last much longer than at least Western eyes had thought?
I think it's also counter-messaging to what's happening on Capitol Hill and also what's happening in the European Union. As Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, is celebrating what he has said all along, which is, I care more about Ukraine than the U.S. and Europe. My staying power is much greater. And look, the U.S. Congress is debating whether or not to continue funding. The European Union is also debating this. Zelensky is sending a message. We are all in on this fight.
How dire is the need for this aid to get solved right now? I feel like Republicans that I talk to don't believe that there's some pressing need to get this figured out in December or even January, that there is more time on the battlefield clock, if you will, than what Zelensky might be telling us.
If you listen to Zelensky, he says, if we don't get this assistance, Ukraine loses. We are almost 2 years into this war. You remember in the early days, everybody said Russia was going to roll over Ukraine in a matter of weeks because of the bravery of Ukrainian soldiers, the resilience of Ukrainian people, and our military assistance, which Ukrainians have used so effectively. Ukraine has now pushed Russia to that southeastern corner. They need to keep them there.
But is there a situation where Ukraine can still win this war, or are we talking about an endless, bloody stalemate in southeastern Ukraine? I think a lot of Republicans are asking, what's the goal at this point of U.S. involvement?
Let's be clear that the United States and our European allies are much stronger in every metric than Russia is. If we want Ukraine to win this war, Ukraine can win this war. So at the moment, it seems like Russia is more committed. I don't think ultimately that is true. We need to stay the course.
There's been a lot of second guessing of the way the administration has supported Ukraine. I think about this as somebody who covers the Hill. Every time Ukraine would ask for something new, be it tanks or fighter jets or anti-aircraft missile systems, the administration would push back and say no until they ultimately said yes. From where we sit now at the end of 2023, should the United States government have been much more forthcoming for all of these requests sooner? Would that have changed the trajectory of this war?
There is an active debate about whether there's a weapons system that will change the trajectory of the war. The United States has committed $45 billion in military assistance to Ukraine. everything we have sent them, Ukraine needs, from artillery ammo to HIMARS that send missiles. So you can debate the mix of those weapons, but I think everything we've sent Ukraine has needed.
Let me ask it another way. Were we too cautious in being worried that somehow we would antagonize Vladimir Putin further by what we sent Ukraine in a piecemeal fashion along the course of this war? Should we have been more bold and said, we want you to win this war, here's what you're going to need up front?
So one thing President Biden has always been clear about is he doesn't want this to be a war between Russia and the U.S. or Russia and NATO. And that's why the weapons we have sent, we've always said, you Ukrainians may not use these weapons to hit targets in Russia.
Right.
Ukraine has hit targets in Russia, but with their own weapons. So I think Ukraine has actually listened to the constraints we've put on those weapons quite effectively.
Now, you're the international political expert, so let me ask you, what's the debate like, what's the state of play like in our European allies? We're not the only ones, as I understand it, having a hard time figuring out how to make this work in terms of what we provide Ukraine and when.
So there was a meeting last week of the 27 leaders of the European Union. They had one piece of good news for Ukraine, which is they agreed to open membership talks with Ukraine to join the European Union. That was a great morale boost to Ukraine, though those negotiations will last a long time. The other thing Ukraine was waiting on was approval of the European Union's budget, which included 50 billion euros, so it's more than $50 billion of assistance to Ukraine. And one of the EU leaders, the Prime Minister of Hungary, said, no, I don't agree. So that's now been bumped to the next EU leaders meeting on February 1.
Viktor Orban, big Trump fan, and vice versa. Domestic and international politics always linked. Karen Donfried, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us on this issue. And tonight on News Now, we're premiering an NBC News documentary that takes an in-depth look at Russia's Vladimir Putin and his network of warlords, oligarchs, and security officials that keep him in power. This features the excellent work of NBC's Keir Simmons and our NBC Moscow bureau team. That's tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News Now. And up next, new intelligence on foreign nations meddling in U.S. elections. What we're learning about what China did to try to influence the outcome of the 2022 midterms and what it means for the security of future elections. Welcome back. As U.S. officials work to prevent foreign adversaries from interfering with next year's election, we're learning more about the efforts to meddle in last year's midterms. According to a new U.S. intelligence report, China tried to influence the 2022 midterms, hoping to counter candidates from both parties considered to be anti-China in a handful of congressional races. The intel assessment says that there's no evidence that China or any other country was actually able to tamper with things like election infrastructure or ballot counting, though. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce joins me now. So, Dan, what do we know about what these meddling efforts look like then? They're not changing vote totals. Are they just trying to change minds? What are they doing?
That's right. They're really trying to exploit the existing political divisions that you report on all the time because they feel like that's more deniable. So they have sort of covert social media accounts. They have proxy websites. And in China's case, they wanted to help or undermine candidates they perceived as pro or anti-China because they see Congress as this kind of hub of anti-China sentiment. So that's what the U.S. intelligence assessment said about China's efforts.
So it's not cutting clearly along party lines. It's sort of on this one particular issue set related to views of China?
That's right. That's China's approach.
Right.
But they were more aggressive than in the past. And the intel community concluded that China had orders, the Chinese government gave orders to their diplomats and their spies to be more aggressive, to have a kind of freer reign to try to meddle and interfere in our elections.
Now, stop me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like the Russians basically wanted us to know at some point that they were out here messing around. They sort of deny it with lip service, but they're pretty public about the idea that they're playing politics with us. The Chinese don't seem to operate in the same way. How do the Chinese feel about the fact that we know this is what they're up to?
Well, I think their view is we are undermining their regime somehow. That they have often accused us of trying to undermine their stability and their political system and promote democracy, which they scoff at. I think Russia's case is interesting, though. They definitely had an agenda. They were trying to denigrate the Democratic Party, according to this intel assessment. And they said they had high confidence in this analysis and that they thought they could your last discussion was about Ukraine. They wanted to undermine public support for Ukraine.
And we mentioned that they didn't appear to tamper or meddle with the election counting, the sort of physical infrastructure. Are they trying to? Is that the kind of next step in this? I mean, if you can't change people's minds, you could change their vote. You could change their votes.
I think that was one of the most interesting things about this assessment. And they said they felt that part of it is these countries have become discouraged, that they realized it's quite difficult to tamper and to hack into our systems. It's become more difficult. They also said that the U.S. has delivered a clear message to these countries that that's a red line.
Interesting.
And so they felt it was maybe easier and even less expensive to go this other route.
The Chinese intelligence hackers can't get into our system seems like a pretty good endorsement of what we've got going. But Dan DeLuce, we got to leave it there. Thank you for sharing that reporting with us. And before we go, you got to take a look at this. Live pictures of an ongoing volcanic eruption in Iceland. This eruption lights up the sky for miles. You see lava still spewing into the air as smoke rises from the eruption site that continues to actually diminish in size now. Only about a third of the original fissure is currently active, so picture that 3 times bigger. And lava flowed down to about a quarter of what we saw initially. Last night's lava shot up 300 feet in the air and flowed towards nearby towns. This came after several earthquakes opened a volcanic fissure about 3 miles long. Now, residents in this area had been evacuated last month after police declared a state of emergency that even shut down the iconic Blue Lagoon. If you've been to Iceland, you've probably been there. The eruption continues to not pose an immediate threat to people, we are told. All right, thank you for being with us this hour. I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Yasmin Vesuvian in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.